Greetings to you all. My name is Benjamin Ferencz, and I'm speaking to you from Cardozo Law School in New York. Sorry that I can't be with you in person. The Nuremberg trials were trying to teach the world that we ought to have a rule of law which would prohibit the type of behavior we all experienced in World War II. I was a combat soldier in that war. I have seen the horrors of war as very few people have. I have seen the crematoria going in the concentration camps as we liberated them. And having had a bird's eye view of what war really means, I came to the conclusion that I would dedicate the rest of my life trying to prevent that from happening again. Never settle your disputes by the use of armed force. The United Nations Charter also requires you and offers you many peaceful ways of settling all your disputes. Use them. If you don't, you will destroy the entire planet. I was a graduate of the Harvard Law School. I had helped one of my professors do his research for a book on war crimes. When I got into the Army, I had trouble getting in. I wanted to be in the Air Corps. They said my feet wouldn't reach the pedals. I wanted to be a navigator. They said that if I was told to bomb Berlin, I'd end up in Tokyo. But I finally got in as a private in the 115th AAA Gun Battalion, which was designed to shoot down enemy planes. Sometimes we shot down Allied planes too. I was assigned then, as we got into the German concentration camp area, to become a war crimes investigator. And I think I was the first man in the American Army to do that. And I would get into my Jeep, race to the camp, pretend that I was General Patton. I would then seize all the records, see what witnesses might be available, other evidence of the crimes, and move on to the next camp. I had the very rare experience of being the first war crimes investigator. It made an impression on some people in the Pentagon, because when the war was over, they sent me a cable saying, "Dear sir," which they'd never called me during the war, "would you please come and see us? We don't have anybody with your experience and your knowledge of this field." And then I was hired. I uncovered the evidence of the crimes by the Einsatzgruppen, and I added up over 1 million people killed. I stopped adding. I flew from Berlin, where I found the documents, to Nuremberg. I said, "General Taylor, we've got to put on a new trial." He said, "We can't. The Pentagon is no longer in favor of these trials. The lawyers are all assigned. We can't do it." I said, "We've got to do it. We can't let these mass murderers go free." He said, "Can you do it in addition to your other work?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Okay, you're it." And so I became the Chief Prosecutor of the biggest murder trial in history, which is also interesting because I'd never been in a courtroom before. I had no experience whatsoever. I was 27 years old, and it was my first case. There were 3,000 members of the Einsatzgruppen. I put on trial 22, selected by their high rank and their education. Why only 22? Because we only had 22 seats in the dock. Ridiculous reason. That was the trial against Goering and Company. Had only 22 defendants. So they were limited. So what do I ask for? Do I ask to chop them up into 1 million pieces and feed them to the dogs? I did think about that, but not for long. I said, look, if this trial is going to have any meaning, it has to be to create a rule of law which will prevent it from happening. The victims were killed simply because they didn't share the race, the religion, or the ideology of their executioners. And I said, if I can get a new rule of law expressing the right of all human beings, regardless of their race or creed, to live in peace and human dignity, that would be a permanent contribution which would save many more people. The judges picked that up and declared very clearly that what was done by these defendants was a crime against humanity, and they sentenced 13 of them to death. So that was my contribution. Failure to provide peace and human dignity to all people, regardless of their race or creed, is a punishable, actionable crime against humanity. And I've been working on that proposition ever since. Every defendant was entitled to 2 defense counsels. That meant I had 44 German lawyers, all experts, against me. I had 3 assistants. So we were outnumbered 10 to 1, and they could say whatever they wanted. They could call whoever they wanted. I was absolutely confident they were not going to shake me. I wasn't going to call a single witness. I was going to get an expert to testify to the authenticity of the documents, that they were assembled in Berlin, consolidated there, sent out in 99 copies to all segments of the Nazi hierarchy, who later said we didn't know anything about it. I didn't need any witnesses. Is your name Otto Ohlendorf? You're the Major General? Is this your report from your unit? What are you going to say? No. So some said I wasn't even there, I never heard of it, wait till I got back, all that kind of BS. But I had that all checked out, and they did not prevail. I had some sympathy with the lead defendant, SS General Dr. Otto Ohlendorf, father of 5 children, who admitted that the crimes were committed by his unit. He even noted that sometimes they bragged about the body count, so it may have been not the 90,000 which they reported, but maybe only 70,000 or 80,000. Again, a giveaway. If they're boasting about how many they killed, they're not doing it with regret. They're bragging about it. So he was honest, and he made a very interesting defense. He said it was in self-defense. I said, where do you come self-defense? Nobody was attacking Germany. You attacked France, Belgium, Holland, all the other countries. Where's your self-defense? He said, well, Hitler told us, and he had more knowledge than I did, that the Russians planned to attack us. And therefore, we would be justified under international law, and he had very many Gutachten, expert opinions from lawyers saying it would be permissible under those circumstances to preempt them by hitting them first. And that's what we were doing. Well, the judges dealt with that question, and they said that is not the law. That is ridiculous. What would the world look like if you could attack your neighbor every time you thought he might attack you? What would the world come to? So they rejected that and sentenced Ohlendorf to death. I went down to see him in the death house. I had never spoken to any of my defendants eye to eye, and I just said in German, Herr Ohlendorf, can I do something for you? I was sure he was going to hang. I thought maybe he wants to say to my children, I love them, say something. And he said, the Jews in America will suffer for what you've done. He had no remorse whatsoever. He began again to report, it was, after all, self-defense, preemption. I slammed the door shut on him and walked away. What grieved me in later years, particularly recently, when the President of the United States, in his first address to the General Assembly of the United Nations, warns North Korea, if we feel threatened by you, we will totally destroy you. It was the preemptive argument that Ohlendorf had made, which ended up with him hanging by a rope for 6 minutes till he was declared dead. And the President of the United States was making the same argument. And I think the Nuremberg court was right in their decision. And the President of the United States was threatening to commit a crime for which I personally was responsible for hanging the German general. It didn't make me feel very good. The crimes which were committed by the Nazi regime were so evil as to be almost indescribable. The concentration camps, the starvation, the burning of people out, killing the children, all of those things were quite horrible. The first approach was to care for the victims. They were destitute, their families had been killed, they had no homes to go back to. They had nothing but a tattoo on their arm. So I set up offices in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem, in 19 other countries, to help the victims with their claims. They were very unhappy. The amounts were inadequate. Every amount would have been inadequate. Germany was itself totally destroyed. They had no housing, they had no food for their people. Thanks to the help of a German Catholic Chancellor, Adenauer, who took the initiative in saying terrible crimes have been committed in the name of the German people, which imposed upon us an obligation to try to make amends. And it had never happened in human history before that a state would compensate individual survivors of the war for the crimes committed. Then to set up the machinery to the claims to flow in. We had to advertise in different languages because the refugees had fled to other countries. I had a staff of about 1,000 people doing that. When the Germans had paid out over 50 billion, I don't remember anymore if it was marks or dollars, but probably it was dollars. I said, it's time for me to go home. There was a strong movement in Israel saying, what, you're going to sit down and negotiate with people who murdered my whole family? Are you crazy? We'll kill you too. And they set up what we would now call a terrorist group, whose instructions were to kill everybody who was connected with the negotiations, Germans and Jews alike. For that reason, we had to have a secret meeting place, which was in The Hague, carefully guarded by the German and the Dutch secret police. The so-called terrorists had some success, which we don't talk about. What was most interesting is that one of the leaders of the terrorist group was a gentleman by the name of Menachem Begin, who became the Prime Minister of Israel and got the Nobel Peace Prize. Moral of the story, be careful who you call a terrorist. He might be your head of state. After the war and after the trials, the German Foreign Ministry was in touch with me and said they wanted to give me their highest civilian award. I had stayed on in Germany and set up the restitution programs for Nazi victims, which was very beneficial to the state of Israel. They wanted to know if I would accept the award. I said, I'll think about it and I'll come back to you. And I met with several survivor groups, and I said, Germany has offered me their highest civilian award. How do you think I should react to that? Well, most of the people said, what? You're going to let the Germans hang a medal on you who killed my parents? Are you crazy? Have you no shame? Most of the people had that feeling. And I said, I've listened, I've heard your point of view, I welcome it, I thank you, but I'm going to accept it. Because this is Germany's way of saying, I'm sorry. In all the years I was in Germany, I stayed there a total of 10 years, considering the trials and the restitution programs. I never had a German come up to me and say he was sorry. I said, this is a way for the government to express their regret by giving me, who prosecuted some of their top people, who jammed down their throat a very costly restitution program at a time when the country was destitute. For them to offer me that is their way of showing the new generation is different. And I said it wouldn't be fair for us to spit in the face of the new generation for the crimes of their fathers or their grandfathers. So I accepted the award. I only wear it if I'm in Germany. I've carried forward a determination to dedicate my life's work in that direction. Let me outline the scope of the approach. First, you have to stop the killing. I did that as a combat soldier, General Patton's army. Next, you have to care for the victims. I did that, setting up the restitution programs under an elementary principle of law. If you form an injury to someone, you have an obligation legally to try to make amends, to cure him or compensate it. The next and most important thing, of course, is to prevent it from happening again. And I'm still in the process of doing that. I have tried to make it lasting by creating a permanent international criminal court, which would certainly condemn crimes against humanity as the worst crimes you could commit. And that is now endangered, tremendously endangered, by the presence of the National Security Advisor of the United States, John Bolton, who has declared war on the ICC and considers it already dead. And he said, under no circumstances will the United States tolerate a court which we held forward as the hope of humankind for a peaceful world. He has condemned it as a threat to the United States. And I can only say that listening to John Bolton reminded me of the German Adolf Hitler, who said also, Deutschland über alles, which translated into Bolton's language is America first. And it says everything is there except the Sieg Heil from Hitler. I want to warn the American and the German public and the rest of the world, unless you want to see a repetition of the horrors committed by Nazi Germany, let your voices be heard loud and clear in opposition to what the United States, in the form of John Bolton, speaking for the President of the United States, is trying to get accepted. We are walking a similar path, and we had to be very careful because we see where it led Germany. I had this discussion with my wife, what do we put on my tombstone? And I said, I just want on there, he tried. She wouldn't agree to that. Put on loving father, blah, blah, blah. What I would like to leave for the people to try to follow is people are guided by slogans more than by reason. And my slogan is law, not war. Imagine how the world would change if we could do that. We would save billions of dollars every day, which is now spent on armaments to kill more people. Instead of using the money to eliminate the necessities which prompts people to want to kill and die for their particular cause, more weapons to kill more people, which creates more enemies. And that's our system. I think it's crazy. It's not only genocidal, it's suicidal. They say, well, how are you going to get there? Well, I have two answers to that. The one I gave to the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights recently was, you get there slowly. And he laughed. And I said, no, the way you get there is you never give up. You never give up, you never give up. And that's my advice to all the listeners on this. Never give up. We're getting there slowly. That human beings should behave as humans. We have to have a change of heart and mind, a recognition that compromise is not an evil thing. It takes courage to compromise, and it takes courage not to be discouraged. And that's my message to the young people of today and tomorrow.